you ready to prime your focus, to move past scattered days and channel your energy into what really matters? This is Primed for ADHD, the podcast for high-functioning women who want simple, brain-friendly ways to feel more in control. I'm your host, Andrea Toole, ADHD coach and educator. Welcome back to the Primed for ADHD podcast. I'm Andrea Toole, ADHD coach and educator. And if this were a video podcast, you would have seen me chair dancing to the intro music. I listen to it before I hit record each time because I like it. And it's a fun little groove. Feel free to chair dance yourself. As an ADHD coach and educator, I work with women navigating ADHD in midlife who feel off balance and want to take control of their ADHD. I help my clients and community identify which parts of their lives are off balance so that they can recalibrate and reclaim that balance. I help them unlock the way they work best so success finally feels more effortless. Whether they were diagnosed in midlife or earlier, whenever you got your diagnosis, I can help. This podcast is part of how I teach, but it's not the only way I support people. If you've been listening to the last couple episodes, you may already feel like something has been quietly clicking into place. 2 episodes ago, we discussed why ADHD can feel harder in midlife, especially as hormones shift. We talked about coaching versus therapy and what different kinds of support are designed to do. If you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, why not do it right now? Today I want to talk about something that tends to sit right underneath both of those conversations. What happens when ADHD is diagnosed later in life, not just clinically, but internally? This discussion will also help women who were diagnosed earlier, and men too. I talk a lot about late diagnosis because women who were born and raised in the last century, boomers, Generation X, elder millennials, we were raised in a time when early diagnosis was more common than boys, and so you're finding a lot more later diagnoses, and I'll discuss that shortly in more depth. And women in midlife are the ones I work with most often and whose stories I know most intimately. And it also shows up when I'm talking to colleagues around my age and friends around my age. For many women, a late diagnosis doesn't arrive as a single moment of clarity. It arrives as a long series of realizations, reinterpretations, and emotional recalibrations. That's a lot of Asians, isn't it? And that process doesn't follow a neat timeline, and this is why the age of diagnosis doesn't really matter even. If this episode feels personal, that's intentional. Late diagnosis is rarely abstract. So let's start with where many women begin, not where we think diagnosis begins. For a lot of women, ADHD isn't discovered because something suddenly goes wrong. It's discovered because what used to work stops working, or because their child is diagnosed. And I have a blog post about generational ADHD, which I'll link to in the show notes. But for now, let that sink in. Generational ADHD. For years, sometimes decades, life has been managed through effort, intelligence, compensation, and adaptability. There are systems, reminders, workarounds, and routines. There is urgency, there is over-preparation, there is pushing through. On the outside, this often looks like competence, responsibility, reliability, professional success, family management, being the person others count on. I am talking with my hands a lot in this episode. Again, if this was on video, it would be different. Well, it would be the same, but you would see it. On the inside, it often requires constant self-monitoring, constant adjustment, constant effort to stay on top of the things that come more easily to other people. When ADHD is diagnosed late, it's rarely because someone wasn't functioning. It's more likely because you were so busy pushing through that you didn't stop to consider that there was an alternative. or because there were just so many other things to consider, or because you didn't know what you didn't know, right? So pause here for a moment and notice what's coming up for you. Not judgment, just recognition. So I said a few moments ago that for many women, a late diagnosis doesn't arrive as a single moment of clarity. It arrives as a long series of realizations, reinterpretations, and emotional calibrations. One of the first things that often happens after a late diagnosis is reinterpretation. Past experiences start reorganizing themselves in your mind. You think back and you start to connect the dots. Jobs that felt inexplicably exhausting, relationships that carried a chronic sense of imbalance, school experiences inside and outside the classroom that were confusing in hindsight, the way you approached deadlines, responsibility, and motivation, the way you studied, the way you did your homework, the way you related to other kids. Oh, so much of it. And once you realize it, it's a lot and it's big. And this isn't about rewriting history to excuse everything. It's about finally having a framework that explains the patterns that never quite made sense before. And this can feel deeply relieving. It can also feel destabilizing. Because when an explanation arrives late, it doesn't just answer questions, it raises new ones. What would things have been like if I'd known earlier? What was actually possible for me? Which parts of my identity were built around coping, not choice? How has my identity shifted? These questions don't require immediate answers, they require space. If any of this resonates, you are not alone, and that means other women aren't alone in this either and need to hear this discussion. If you follow the podcast, rate it, or leave a review, it will help more women find this conversation, especially those who don't yet have language for what they're experiencing. Feel free to share this with your friends. Now I'm going to discuss why awareness can make things feel harder before they feel easier. Another thing that often surprises people is that a diagnosis doesn't automatically make life easier. People think, oh, I'm diagnosed. Yeah, my life has changed. It's all going to be better now. However, for a while, things can feel harder. Awareness increases before capacity does. If you start noticing the effort you've been exerting for years, oh, that's common. You start noticing how much energy it takes to manage yourself. You start noticing where systems are fragile instead of supportive. Nothing new has appeared, but everything is more visible. You're suddenly conscious of it. Once you see things, you can't unsee them. This is where many women get stuck. Not because they're doing something wrong, but because insight alone doesn't tell you what to do next. Understanding ADHD explains the past, it doesn't automatically build the future. And that is an important distinction, and it's one I'll keep returning to throughout this season of the podcast. And as I discussed in my last episode, ADHD coaching, which I provide, can help. So now I'm going to discuss the emotional layer people aren't prepared for. Late diagnosis also has an emotional component that doesn't get enough attention. Something else we can discuss in coaching. There can be grief, not always dramatic, not always obvious, but present. It's grief for the version of yourself who worked harder than necessary. Grief for missed accommodations that didn't exist. grief for relationships that might have unfolded differently with more understanding, both your own understanding of your own ADHD and their understanding. Sometimes I wonder if life would have been easier if I'd been diagnosed as a child and received accommodations. And then I also think about how I earned every good grade without the diagnosis. Every good grade, every poor grade. And it's not that I was an excellent student, but the good grades I got did reflect my interests, like high school, like when I did high school essays where I could choose the topic, or also university essays where I could choose a topic. And I excelled in anything to do with writing. And these are traits of ADHD. You do better when you're interested in the topic. You're more invested. It gives you more of that dopamine boost. And my good grades, they reflected how I studied. Again, what I now realize was ADHD related. I used multicolored highlighters. There was generous use of the 4-color Bic pen. Lots of notes in the margins, plenty of asterisks. I just remember sitting in the library making lots of colorful notes, and that helped me remember. So it was one of those reasons, years later, it occurred to me, I was adapting to the ADHD I didn't know I had. So another common emotion that people experience after their diagnosis is anger. It's an anger at systems, at institutions, at parents who didn't know any better, at cultural narratives that rewarded burnout and penalized difference. Anger at, I don't know, those are the ones I came up with. Maybe you've got others. And there can be relief that finally allows your nervous system to stand down a little. And all of these reactions can coexist. None of them are wrong. They're all valid. What matters is that they're acknowledged rather than rushed past. So now we're going to talk about when expectations start to shift. Another shift that often happens after diagnosis is around expectations. For years, many women internalize the idea that if they just find the right systems, the right routine, the right level of discipline, the right this, the right that, things will finally stabilize, and they don't know why things aren't working for them. They just can't figure it out. Why can't I figure this shit out? Why does it seem to work for everyone else? Why is that this planner that promises to be life-changing isn't changing mine? Or it did for about a week, and then I put it aside and stopped using it. Diagnosis interrupts that storyline. It introduces the possibility that some struggles weren't personal failures or temporary lapses, but reflections of a brain and a nervous system that work differently. Your brain looks different than that of someone who is so-called neurotypical, and your brain chemistry is different. This doesn't mean giving up responsibility. It means redefining what support looks like. And that is where many people start looking outward for tools, for medication, for programs, for professionals, for answers. And this brings us back to why the conversation about coaching versus therapy matters here. Late diagnosis often requires more than understanding. It requires translation, application, rebuilding. I emphasize accountability in my coaching. I often say, and people disagree with me about this, ADHD is a reason, it's not an excuse. And I say this to stress the accountability. You've got to do the work. You can be disciplined with self-compassion. If you fail, and you will, try again, try a different way, experiment to see what works. But take responsibility. Don't just say, I fucked up because it was my ADHD. Sure, maybe you did, but what are you going to do next time so you don't fuck up again? And maybe you will keep fucking up, and that's fine, but just make an attempt to make it better. And by listening to this podcast, you're already doing the work. You are making an attempt to be better. You are actively seeking out tools to help you, and that's great. So you don't need that warning. You are taking responsibility. You are using it, more likely to use ADHD as a reason, not an excuse. I'm not worried about you. And don't compare yourself to others or let your obsessive thoughts focus on what seems to work for other people. It's far more productive to focus on what works for you. You aren't everyone else. You need your own solutions. One of the most important things I want to say in this episode is this. Diagnosis is an exciting opportunity. Maybe it feels like, I don't know, some kind of end to something. Maybe it feels depressing. I don't know. Like I said, you might experience mixed emotions, whether it's grief or anger, etc. But it's an exciting time. You get to find a new way of being that makes life easier. Doesn't that sound good? And if living with ease doesn't feel good, why not? What stories are you telling yourself? It's a good question to ask yourself, and if you have a therapist, discuss it in therapy. As a coach, I'll help you move forward. So you've got a new beginning that benefits from curiosity, patience, and a willingness to experiment. And people with ADHD are naturally curious. We're experimenters. We like to pull things apart and put them back together, don't we? We might not have patience, but it's something we can build. It's something we need, especially patience for ourselves. If you're newly diagnosed or newly recognizing how ADHD has shaped your life, you don't need to overhaul everything at once. You don't need to explain yourself to everyone. You don't need to make decisions about medication, disclosure, or identity on a compressed timeline. You're allowed to observe. You're allowed to notice what feels validating, what feels confronting, and what feels confusing. Take your time. The intersection of therapy and coaching is here. And if you haven't listened to my previous episode, hit play on it when you're done this one. So here, I'm going to give you some questions to sit with. They're not tasks to complete, but they're just something for you to ponder. They're points of reflection that you can return to over the coming days. And if you have a journal, now's a good time to pause and pull it out. So question 1. Where have you been compensating without realizing it? Question 2. What parts of your life feel heavier than they used to? And which parts feel lighter now that you have language for your experience? I'll read that again. Which parts of your life feel heavier than they used to? And which parts of your life feel lighter now that you have language for your experience? Question 3. What support would feel stabilizing right now? Not aspirational, but genuinely supportive. And question 4. What would it look like to move forward with your ADHD in mind rather than trying to outwork it? You don't need to answer all of these today. You don't need to answer them right now. You don't need to answer them perfectly because there is no perfect. Just notice what comes up. Just see. So that's what I wanted to discuss about midlife diagnosis. And I'm going to tell you what's coming up next. In the next episode, we're going to get more practical. We'll talk about how to communicate an ADHD diagnosis, if and when you choose to, with family, friends, and at work. Not as confession, but as a strategic conversation shaped by context and boundaries. For now, if this episode resonated, you're welcome to sit with it. You don't need to do anything else. Well, other than engage with it. If today's episode was helpful, follow it. Subscribe to the podcast. Follow, subscribe, whatever it is on the platform you're listening, so you don't miss the next episode. Rate it on Apple and Spotify, like it on YouTube, share it. In other words, do all the engagement things, again, based on wherever you're listening to this. And if you're comfortable, I would love to hear what changed for you after diagnosis. You can share in a review, a message on my website, or a comment, depending on the platform, again, that's broadcasting my voice to you right now. And if you want additional support, and I highly encourage it, I offer private ADHD coaching for women who are ready to feel grounded, clear, and supported in real life, not just in theory. I also run Wild Minds, which is my group coaching space for professional women managing ADHD in midlife. It's structured, supportive, and designed for women who want community without chaos. And the founding cohort begins in February 2026. You can learn more about my coaching work and lots of other things. I've got a blog at andreatoolcoach.com. Thanks for listening. I've got you. Cue the outro music and start that chair dancing again.